Well, hello and welcome back to Jones Financial Talk. This is Nick Jones from Jones and Associates Premier Financial Solutions. Listeners, please go to our website to check out all of the great radio shows that Tony Shore and I do here weekly. You can find that website at jonesfinancialtalk.com. Lots of our listeners obviously go on and they can listen to our shows in many different ways. Some people find us on Spotify, and other people send messages to us on a weekly basis to ask about the topics that they want to hear about on our show. That's where we got the topic for the show today. We are going to talk about how your retirement income is taxed. This is such a big thing for so many people. Before we talk about it, though, let me bring in Tony Shore, my co-host, and welcome him to the show. How are you today, Tony?
Nick, great to be here. Thanks for having me on your show. I love doing this with you. It gives me an excuse to hang out with you each week for at least an hour. We hang out, do the show. I absolutely love it. You know that. And I've had a great week. It's been pretty busy, though, moving my daughter off to college, our youngest.
Okay, wow.
We have three kids. Our youngest, we just moved her into her dorm at college. She starts her first year of college. And we just moved her in this week. So we're hoping it goes well for her. She's very excited. She's going to a school in Minnesota, Winona State, to be a nurse. And we're really proud of her. Hope she does well there. But it's interesting. What do you think, Nick? Empty nesters.
Pretty lucky, I'll tell you that. So I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old at home still. And I'm towards the end of that train, Tony, so I'm looking forward to trying to be an empty nester here in the near future as well.
Sure.
But super excited for your daughter. That's great.
Yeah. So it's been a busy week with that, plus work and family, but having fun. How about you? What have you been up to?
Been very, very busy this summer. We're getting towards the end of the summer. The kids are starting to go back to school, which is great. And what that typically means in the financial advisor world is you meet with more people because the summer's over. And so, this is the third and fourth quarter that we're going into. And a huge thing that we talk to our clients about during these quarterly reviews that we're doing actively is taxation, because we're getting towards the end of the year. There's lots of steps you can take from a planning perspective to make your tax payments more efficient through different ideas that we'll discuss on the show today, obviously.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think this is going to be a great show today, Nick. And you always put together great topics for us. So where do you want to begin today?
So the main thing here is, most people, when they decide to retire, think about the things that they're going to get to do, right? The new hobbies they're going to experience and what they want on a daily basis. But the biggest thing to change is, your income is different, right? You're not working. You can't supplement your income as much as you did before because you're no longer working. And so what you need to think through with your advisor is, how am I going to save as much as that as possible? And a huge thing is taxes. It comes up every single year. Tax brackets change. And so I thought we'd just talk about, how different retirement income is taxed, because so many people ask about this, and then come up with maybe some strategies as well about how to reduce and minimize those taxes and put you in a better situation, Tony.
Well, who doesn't want to minimize their tax burden? I mean, that's, it seems like no matter what we talk about on the show, Nick, taxes play a part in it. And I think that people groan, oh, no, the subject is taxes. And nobody likes hearing about taxes. But you know what you do like hearing about? Tax-free. I like those two words.
Yep.
If you add a free behind the word tax, it's awesome. Tell me about, I want to hear more. How can I get tax-free income? And taxes in retirement. I think it's so important to understand that, because I know when my wife and I first started talking about, what are we going to do in retirement? How much money are we going to need? She was like, well, we're not going to need, we'll have more money because we won't be paying much in taxes. And I think that's the attitude. And I had that same attitude. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. And I used to have that attitude before doing the show with you. But that's a big myth, isn't it? That you're not going to have as many taxes in retirement.
That's exactly correct. And also the main thing is, depending on where your tax bracket falls, you can be subject to some higher taxes on some specific income that maybe you didn't want to be, in that bracket for. And so
Sure.
We outline this to many of our clients. When I sit down quarterly and go through kind of the distribution income plan for our clients, a big thing is taxes. Most people think about gross numbers. They think, okay, I'm going to take 4% off my investments, and here's where it's going to get me with the monthly income. But the problem with that is you're not factoring in taxes. And so it's got to be a huge subject that you talk through. The first thing that most people pull money out of, Tony, is traditional 401ks and IRAs. And, initially, these are great tax deferred accounts, and they're going to reduce the taxable income for the people that utilize these accounts while they're working, which is phenomenal, right? Because it grows tax free.
Right.
However, when you eventually get to the distribution phase, which is what we're talking about, now you're going to pay taxes on it, and it's going to be the worst tax rate of ordinary income tax, which is both federal and state. So in the state of Oregon here, I mean, we're in the top 5 for state income tax numbers, and so you're at the high end around 10% just in the state of Oregon that you're paying, and then you got to figure out your federal bracket depending on how much income you're making, and so that is kind of the situation where the highest tax burden is going to be for most of our clients.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up these retirement accounts, because the most popular types of retirement accounts, I mean, for millions of Americans, are the 401k or the traditional IRA. And the traditional 401k, 403b, IRAs, those are all tax-deferred accounts, these retirement accounts. And so hopefully they've built up a lot of money in these accounts over time. The problem is they're fully taxable on the principal, and the interest is fully taxable. Everything you take out is fully taxable at your top tax rate typically. So that could be a ticking tax time bomb, as Ed Slott has said in the past, who's a premier expert on IRAs and taxes and retirement taxes. So I'm glad you're bringing this up, because a lot of us are going to have that lump sum, but it's in an account with money that hasn't been taxed for a lot of people, right?
That's correct. And the best thing about owning an individual 401k or individual retirement account in an IRA is that you get to choose, for the most part, how much you're going to take out and when you're going to do that.
Sure.
And so if you're active, sitting down with your advisor and talking about all of your different income sources, which we'll talk about today, this is one of those situations where if you calculate it correctly, you can stay in a great tax situation depending on the income that you need. I mean, many times I sit down with clients and they say, Nick, I need X amount of dollars. And we start looking at their budget and I go, well, do you really need that much, or do you need that to feel comfortable? And what I mean by that is a lot of people assume they're going to take a monthly draw, which, adds to their savings account, for instance. Great thing. You got to have a savings account, right?
Right.
However, most of this money is somewhat liquid and you can get access to it very quickly. So what if I told you, Tony, if you decide to take that extra $5,000 or $10,000, now you're going to pay 20 or 25% in federal taxes instead of just not taking it until you need it and deferring that longer, right? And so that's a perfect example of just something that you should be discussing with your advisor when you're taking withdrawals. And another thing that's tied to these specific types of accounts that comes up a lot, Tony, is the RMDs, right? The required minimum distributions.
RMD stands for required minimum distribution. Okay.
It's exactly
Again,
correct.
I always get confused, because for me, RMD means really massive donut. And I've said that before. I've said that before on the show, really massive donut. But required minimum distributions are what you need to worry about in retirement, right?
That's exactly right, because that donut that you're talking about, you're going to be forced to eat some of it at a certain age, okay?
Yeah.
So how does that work? Well, for a very long period of time, when retirees reached the age of 70 and a half, they were required to take a certain percentage of their account out every single year. And this is a tax table that the IRS publishes every single year. And they basically say you have to take a percentage of your taxable accounts out every single year based on what it was worth at the end of last year. And then every year that you get older, you have to take a little bit more. The good thing is, with all of the different legislation that's come out with the CARES Act 1 and the CARES Act 2.0, we have pushed out the required minimum distribution ages from 70 and a half to 72. This year it's 73. and it actually is going to move to 74 and 75. And so what does that do? Well, it gives people that are younger than that the opportunity to understand how they're going to be forced to take that money out and what tax planning tips they could get from their advisor along the way to maybe minimize that in the future, right? So an example, Tony, if I've got somebody that retires and they're 65 and they know they don't have to take money out of their retirement accounts that are fully taxable, these IRAs, 401ks, and 403bs, until the age of 75, we've got a 10-year window to try to draw down some of those accounts in a way from a tax perspective that they're not going to be forced to do it more when they're older. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes perfect sense. So it's interesting when you start talking about RMDs. Of course, fortunately, they moved the age up when they really force you to start taking those. But you want to make sure you avoid the penalty and have a plan in place, because then you're also going to have to pay taxes on that money at that time.
That's right. And probably more often than not now, because of the pandemic, I get lots of people that are coming into the office at a much younger age thinking that they want to retire. And you brought up a good point. You know, those specific types of accounts come with a pretty steep 10% penalty if you take money out before the age of 59 and a half. So a lot of people just assume, look, I've got $100,000 in my retirement account. If they decide to take it out and they're under 59 and a half, they're paying $10,000 in a penalty up front. And then on top of that, they're going to pay a huge amount of taxes because they're still working or they just stopped working. And so you need to think about the timing of how all of these distributions work and how to actually accomplish it without an unnecessary step of paying a penalty or more taxes, Tony.
Sure. And we talk about solutions to the problems that you're bringing up, and I know you've talked a lot about Roth IRAs,
yes,
which are not taxable when you take the money out in retirement. So that's tax-free income. You don't have to pay taxes on the principal or the interest and gains, do you?
No, you are correct. You give up the tax deduction up front when you put money into the Roth IRA or when you convert money into a Roth IRA. But the advantage is over the rest of the time that you own that account, you are never forced to take a required minimum distribution, which is a huge point. The money continues to grow tax deferred. And then in many situations, you don't have to pay taxes on any of the earnings as well. The reason why I say many situations, Tony, is there are some intricacies that you need to discuss with your advisor. One of those that comes to mind is, you know, you must have had your Roth IRA open for at least 5 years before you start taking those tax-free withdrawals. That is a stipulation in the IRS code today.
Sure. Sure, and it's important to understand how all this works. And I think taxes alone and the tax implications of retirement accounts are enough of a reason to need to work with a trusted independent financial advisor, somebody like yourself and your firm there at Jones and Associates, because you don't want to have to deal with this alone. You don't want to make costly mistakes, right? And you want to be able to minimize that tax burden, and that's what we're talking about today. So before we go on, let's take a moment here to let our listeners know how they can get a hold of you, Nick.
Sure thing. So the easiest way is just go to jonesfinancialtalk.com. There's lots of ways that you can request further information from us about what you hear on the show today, or request meetings with us to talk about these specific situations for yourself. So please go to jonesfinancialtalk.com, listeners.
What's next? What's something else when it comes to taxes that people need to know about for their retirement plans?
So one of my favorite conversations with clients, Tony, about planning the distribution of their accounts is understanding kind of 3 buckets of money. Okay. All right. And what I mean by that is we talked about traditional IRAs and traditional 401ks and 403bs, which are fully taxable. And then you've got this other bucket of money that are Roth contributions and Roth accounts. And then you've got taxable accounts, which is money that is not saved in a retirement account. So I kind of call them cash accounts, although you are going to pay taxes on some of the interest. And the reason why I just bring those 3 buckets of money up is it is ideal for me as an advisor to be able to sit down in front of my clients that have those types of different accounts, because then when they come to me and say, I have this other need for income or whatever it is, we have so many different options to choose from. And more importantly, be effective in the way that we take money out of those accounts to reduce the taxes. And so that's why it's so important. If you've only got one bucket of money to come to, you don't have a choice. I'm not going to be able to help you much. I'm just going to say you got to pull it from there because you need the money. And so at that point, the conversation becomes how much are you going to pay in taxes, right? But if you've got all three different types of buckets of money, then it just makes it so much more flexible for us to decide what the best case scenario is. And, the reason why that's so important is other income that we're going to talk about. And so a huge thing that comes into play when I talk about other income is Social Security. A lot of people think, well, I've been paying into Social Security for 30, 40 years. Why should I have to pay taxes on Social Security when I retire? And the truth is, it's dependent on how much your total income is. Social Security and the IRS looks at your provisional income, which is a limit that you can make basically and not have to pay taxes on your Social Security. But federally, Tony, if you are a little bit well off and making jointly about $44,000 a year, you're going to be in that situation where you could lose or be taxed on as much as 85% of your Social Security benefit. All right. And on top of that, depending on the state that you live in, you could be taxed by the state as well. Luckily, for those listeners that are in Oregon and on most of the West Coast, California and Washington, you do not pay taxes to the states for Social Security.
That's good, because my home state of Minnesota, you do, and it's high. So
yes.
So not only do you have to pay tax on up to 85% of your Social Security income if you make over that certain amount, which I think a lot of people will in retirement, hopefully, that they will make that, but then they have to pay taxes. I'm glad it's not 100% yet. At least it's only 85. But in certain states like Minnesota, you also have to pay then state tax on your Social Security income, and it's nice that Oregon is not one of those states.
So think about it in Oregon. Yeah. Although I told you that we are in the top 5, for worst income brackets for states at 10% being the high number, 9.9, you don't pay that for Social Security. So that's a lot of times when we're having these conversations about when to draw Social Security and what your income needs are, I have to explain that to people, because think about it. If your Social Security is heavy, say you're 50, 60, 70,000 a year you're going to make, let's say it's 70,000 a year, you're going to save $7,000 by not having to pay the state of Oregon on any of those taxes, on any of that income, right? And so what I mean by that, Tony, and the reason why I bring it up, that's another planning step to think through before you just start thinking about taking distributions out of your retirement accounts. If you said, I'm going to delay Social Security and pull money out of my retirement accounts, well, you're definitely paying income tax to the state of Oregon on all of the money that you pull out of your 401k and IRAs. But if you take Social Security, you get a 10% break basically, because you don't pay the state of Oregon anything. And so that's a huge planning step and tool that you've got to use to think through those situations. The other thing is, many clients come in and they have pension plans that were paid that are paid monthly, right, by the state of Oregon or by their employer, and those fall in typically to the same bucket as 401ks and IRAs, where they're fully taxable. So the reason why I bring that up is you've got multiple sources of income that you can have. The majority of those have different tax rules and laws. And if you're not thinking about what the taxation is going to be on each of those different buckets of income, you're just doing yourself a disservice. Don't assume that you need X amount of dollars every month or X amount of dollars every year, and you're just going to go get it there because it's the same as everywhere else. It's not. It's not. You've got to know the rules and understand how they interact with each other to make sure that you keep as much of this money in your pocket. That's the whole plan and tool here. When you retire, you don't want to go back to work. You're not going to make any more income that is significant that's going to help you on a monthly basis. So if you're smart with the way that you draw money out of your accounts, you save more. Yeah. It's simple, right? So that's the idea here, Tony.
Well, and that's really good, and it's good to know. I think a lot of people think that they're not going to be taxed, their Social Security isn't going to be taxed in retirement, And that's a big myth out there that I used to believe that, and that's just not true. And you're really knocking a lot of these down and really giving us the facts about taxes in retirement, which is what today's show is all about. Now, I have a question for you, Nick. What about pensions? I know that pensions, you know what I like to say, pensions have gone the way of the pension.
There's not a lot of them out there
because
for younger
they brought
employees.
back the bison, so we can't say going the way of the buffalo because really they've brought them back, right? They're doing a good job of that. However, there just aren't many pensions unless you work for the state or the government. Some of those jobs still have pensions, obviously. So if you do happen to be fortunate enough to work for a company or work for the government where you do get a pension or military pension, some type of state or government job, is your pension tax that income?
Yes, so definitely it is. It is somewhat dependent on the type of contributions that are made to the plan, just like a 401k. What I mean by that is if there was after-tax money contributed to the plan on your behalf or by you in some type of pension payment, right, then that's going to be in the bucket that kind of Roth IRAs are in.
Sure.
But the majority of the income that you're going to pull out of your pension is going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates because it's paid in from a pre-tax standpoint.
Okay.
And think about it from this perspective, Tony. Until just recently, literally until January of this year with the CARES Act 2.0, employers wanted to give benefits to their employees. So what did they do? They gave them pensions or they matched money inside their retirement accounts, right? And that's great.
Right, like a 401k match that a lot of people get. Yep.
Exactly. That's great. But there is an incentive for employers to get a tax break by doing that. So it's a business expense to put in money on behalf of your employees pre-tax into a retirement plan. Okay? And what I mean by that is they would never put money post-tax, right? Because they wanted the actual business write-off to put the money inside the plan. Sure. Right? It's a liability for them. Well, today, we're not exactly sure how this is going to work totally going forward, but there are opportunities going forward for post-tax money to now be a match rather than pre-tax. Sure. They're toying with the ideas today, and they're not quite sure who's going to have to pay the taxes on them. It's probably going to be the employee, but it probably will be a better thing long term by keeping that money on that Roth side for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good, and it's good to understand this. Now, what about, I think I want to go next to investments. So a lot of people might have money in the market. They might make interest each year. Hopefully, those investments will go up in those stocks and investments. So what about returns like dividends or interest made on investments or stock investments? Is that taxable?
Yeah, so definitely it is. There's two different ways that it's taxed today, depending on how long you the ownership type and length of time is what I should say. So first of all, at the very bare minimum, when you're talking about a savings account or you're talking about a money market account or you're talking about something that pays dividends, they typically pay it right away. And so what's going to happen is you're going to pay ordinary income tax on those specific amounts of money. So sure. Today, for instance, we're very lucky in some of our money market portfolios, we're yielding 4.5%. Okay, so on $100,000, that's $4,500 in interest that you get a year. That's basically paid to you monthly. That $4,500 in interest is taxed at ordinary income rates. You don't pay taxes on the $100,000 because you already put that money in.
Right.
But the $4,500 is definitely taxable.
Exactly.
Now, with stocks, bonds, mutual funds, CDs that are longer than a 12-month term, meaning you own them for longer than that, now you move into the capital gains tax rates rather than the ordinary income tax rates. And the reason why that's so important is, one, the capital gains tax brackets are much lower than ordinary income tax brackets, and they're much wider. Okay, so what I mean by that, Tony, is an example. A couple that's married and files jointly is in the 12% federal tax bracket up to about $90,000 in regular income.
Sure.
Okay. But if they keep their income below $90,000, including capital gains from investments, they don't pay any tax, zero federally,
Wow.
on the capital gains of those actual investments. So again, strategic here, right? If you're sitting down with your advisor and you know you're close to that next threshold, do you sell this year because you're going to pay taxes, or do you wait till next year? So you got to have those conversations. And then on top of that, you will pay state taxes. So in Oregon, capital gains tax rates are the same as individual ordinary income tax rates. So that's unfortunate. You could pay up to 10% in Oregon.
Sure.
But on the high end, you're going to pay 15 to 20% in capital gains rates rather than almost 40% in the highest ordinary income tax bracket.
Sure. And that makes sense. I think all of these things need to be considered. Any type of income in retirement, you have to look, is that, and I like how you put it, buckets. Is that in the tax-free bucket? Is it in the taxable bucket? Can I defer tax to later? How is it going to work? And so you've talked about 401ks, pensions. And what about, I know a lot of people, it's really popular. Fixed index annuities and MIGAs are popular right now because of interest rates for MIGAs, and on fixed index annuities, you can participate in the upside of the market with no market downside participation, so your principal's protected. But how does that work when you have an annuity? Do you have to pay taxes on that money?
Okay, great question. So first of all, annuities can be held in many different types of accounts. So if they're
Sure.
held in a 401k or IRA taxable account, they're just the same. And once the investment is pulled out of the actual account, you're going to pay ordinary income tax rates.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, makes
Now,
sense.
now in after-tax accounts, non-qualified accounts like we're talking about with the stock, bond, mutual fund, interest-bearing accounts, the advantage of an annuity in some situations is that those interest bearing accounts that you make inside of an annuity are deferred until you actually take the money out. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you buy a 3-year, multi-year guaranteed annuity, like you mentioned, Tony, which is basically a CD that's issued by a life insurance company. Today, rates are about 5.5% for 3 years locked in. Let's say you put $100,000 into this multi-year guaranteed annuity.
Right.
In a 3-year period, you're going to make somewhere around $17,000 in interest with a rate like that.
Sure.
Okay. But you don't pay taxes on the $17,000 unless you take it out along the way. If you leave it in at the end of 3 years, you got $117,000 sitting there. What do? You have a couple of options. If you decide to take the money out of the annuity, you're going to pay ordinary income taxes on the $17,000, which is the gain. You're not paying on the $100,000 you put in. Okay. But then on top of that, if you decide that you don't need that interest or need the money, you can roll it into another annuity. It's called a 1035 exchange. And what that does is it continues to defer the gain of that 17,000 until a later date. Now,
Okay.
if you left it inside that multi-year guaranteed annuity, it would do the same thing. You have to look at that with your advisor and see if it's still attractive to leave that money there. And so a lot of people come in, and depending on who they worked with in the past, they have an annuity that's an old annuity, and they just assume, well, I put this money in, it's made some money, I'm going to take it out. And I go, wait. You're going to pay a lot of taxes if you take it out because it's ordinary income tax rates, not capital gains. So say you put 100 grand in, 10 years later, it's worth 150. If you take it out, it's going to be like taking that 50,000 out of a regular retirement account because you're going to pay ordinary income tax on it. And it could be a terrible situation for your tax bracket by doing that.
Sure. Makes sense. So are there annuity types where you put the money in, you've already paid taxes on the money, so you put in money that has already been taxed, then when you can pull that money out of the annuity tax-free, or does an annuity not work like that?
Yeah, so in some situations, if you turn on income for life out of an annuity, like using what's called an income rider, then only a portion of the money that you draw out of the annuity is taxable over time. And so you spread that tax burden over many years rather than all at once if you just take the money out.
Sure.
That's a good question. We get asked that all the time. You know, Tony, I just thought of one thing also that we didn't discuss when we were talking about Social Security. And the reason why I just thought about it was saving more money, in your pocket. People ask me a lot about how Medicare is affected
Yes.
with taxes,
Yep.
right? And, this it's unfortunate, but Social Security, health insurance, Medicare, they're all based on the income that you make. The more income you make, the more taxes you pay or the higher your actual premium is going to be for the Medicare insurance. And then on top of that, for those people that retire before the age of 65 that are not eligible for Medicare, it's a pay-to-play system, right? If you go to the marketplace to find insurance, the main thing they ask you is how much money you make.
Right.
And that determines how much you pay on a monthly basis. So it's something like for about every $10,000 more you make in income, you pay another $100 to $120 a month in an insurance premium. And so people are going, well, why are you even talking about this, Nick? Well, the reason why is what happens if you just decide to pull money out of your account without talking about the tax implications of it? And yes, you get hit in that year from a tax situation, you're mad about it, but what if it affects your Medicare premiums or your health insurance premiums for many years after that?
Wow.
That's really going to hurt you. You're really going to be disappointed because a lot of people assume that Medicare is the same amount for everybody. It's $165 a month, but that's not true. That's limited today right around a $90,000 to $95,000 threshold. If you go over it, it starts doubling, and you can pay up to $600 a month for Medicare, depending on how high your income is. So think about how different that is for somebody that's used to paying 160, 165, and now it doubles to 320. And it doubles to 320 for the next year or two. I mean, that's a huge mistake that you made in a tax situation that you just needed to discuss before it came about.
Yeah. Again, why you need somebody who is used to this, knows what to look for, and you need to work with a financial services professional, an advisor who's a fiduciary like yourself, Nick. And speaking of that, we're out of time for today's show, but before we go, let our listeners know how they can get a hold of you.
Sure thing. If you'd like to discuss anything like we talked about on the show today or anything specific for your situation, please just reach out to us. Easiest way is to go to jonesfinancialtalk.com. You can request any information you want on our website. Once again, jonesfinancialtalk.com.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Great show today. Thank you, listeners and viewers. We'll talk to you next week. That does it for today's episode of Jones Financial Talk.